Sometimes I forget that just settling in and doing poses is really the easiest way to zone into the experience of animating, since the heart of a good animation is simply a series of good poses. It's such a joy to sip some coffee and put on some music and work through the finer elements of setting up a pose without the complexity of trying to animate it, since I'm not really concerned with the action on the timeline or interpolating between poses, and I can just relax and get into the feel thinking about gesture and balance. Since I've been spending a lot of time coding and working on tools lately, I had to remind myself that I created this model and rig and kinematic tool to make posing and animating human movement a breeze. So instead of waking up and burying my face in code all day, I decided to spend some time soaking up art by emulating it. I find a good art session usually leaves me with more passion than I had before, and there's no better way to build confidence in a craft than calm and thoughtful practice. So instead of tackling something extreme, I decided to get this morning started with a simple yet interesting pose, and I found just the right video from this really cool art history channel I've been watching called Smart History. And what I like about their videos is that they do a great job of describing the poses of the sculptures they're looking at by illuminating the twists and the forces happening within the pose. In this video in particular, they discuss contrapposto and the Greek origins of the artistic technique, which itself makes for far more interesting and dynamic gestures than symmetrical poses. In the case of this Roman figure, contrapposto appears in the way the pelvis and chest hinge into each other, with one leg locked and under tension while the opposite leg is relaxed, putting most of the weight on the straightened leg. For the second pose, I came back to this discus thrower, which I've played around with in the past, but without the discus in hand. By the way, I should mention here that until Valentine's Day, I'm offering this model, rig, and the kinematic tool I built for it for $5 at sleffy.gumroad.com, so go take advantage of it. To really sell the discus throwing pose, I took a few minutes to create a simple disc shape by flattening a sphere. I gave it a single bone armature and used the child of constraint to yield its movement to the right hand bone. Discobolus is such an awesome sculpture, and to consider the original was created nearly 2,500 years ago is mind-boggling. The pose itself may be the oldest surviving depiction of humans using twisting movement and long leverage to launch objects crazy far distances. I've been watching a bunch of discus throwing events on YouTube lately, and I can't get enough of them. They're so dynamic. I love that almost everything about throwing a discus incorporates the concept of a circle. You spin and create circular arcs to generate force. The object you throw spins and itself is a circle, and for athletic competitions, you actually have to perform inside of a circle. While posing this throw, the question I continued to have was, is the pose trying to communicate a sense of balance right here as though it's winding up for a throw? Or is it off balance and mid-throw and already traveling forward? I can't entirely tell, and it ends up leaving me with a lot more questions than I started, which is great because I'll use those questions as fuel to further explore the beauty of discus throwing. The other element of this pose I wanted to nail was this gestural curve that runs from the pelvis across the torso toward the neck, and to try and get a bit of an arch from the hands through the collarbones. For the final pose this morning, I wanted to take another poke at the farnese hercules. I played around with it a little while ago, but this time wanted to create a fun little mock-up mound, club, lion skin, and apples to really fill out the scene. I didn't understand until watching this Smart History video that the sculpture is really conveying that Hercules is actually resting, not just leaning on his club after completing one of his 12 labors. So while building this pose, I wanted to keep it in the back of my mind that he's rather exhausted. There's a few elements to this pose that I love, but I think the key is recognizing that his feet are outside the center line of his head and neck, which really puts a lot of emphasis on the hinge of his pelvis, just like the contrapposto hinge in our first Roman figure pose. With Hercules' feet so far out and with the hinge in his pelvis, you can really sense the weight carrying through to his shoulder and into the club. I'm also in love with the pose of his fingers, with all the joints and various angles in such a tight spot. Getting a good hand gesture adds so much emphasis to the pose. Altogether, I'm super happy that I spent the morning creating these poses and with the way they turned out, especially the Farnese Hercules, such an iconic pose I've been looking at for at least a decade. There's just been so many artistic studies of it over the years. Anyways, take advantage of the $5 sale for the prototyper rig, character model, and kinematic tool, available until Valentine's Day, and I'll catch you on the flip side.